Okay, so to start, what we need to do is establish like a basic premise, which is an agreement amongst us all that gun violence is a real problem, specifically in the United States, where we consistently see higher firearm homicides than most similar developed countries. And once we establish our basic premise, we should offer solutions to fix the problem. And that right there is why this debate is painful, because you guys get to sit there and do nothing about the problem, while Red Bat and I have to come up with ideas to actually solve it. You'll just reject all our ideas, and the audience will think you've won, even though you've come to the table and basically said nothing. While we look like idiots for suggesting ways to help people not die.
Well, if I may, our solutions are to violence in general, not just gun violence.
Well, I feel like that's a separate debate. Like there's multiple solutions to violence in general, right?
Sorry.
Well, the debate on gun violence is particular to guns, right? Like their guns present a unique problem in and of themselves. We can propose ideas for solving violence in general as well that don't necessarily involve guns.
Well, I'd argue that solutions that reduce violence in general are separate from. Well, there's overlap, but there's a separate. They're separate from solutions that would specifically reduce gun violence. You could reduce violence in general and still have more violence than if you didn't try to also reduce gun violence. What I mean is you could take a solution that, say, reduces overall violence by 20%, but we could still have, let's say, 5% higher violence rate than if we also try to reduce gun violence. So that's still 5% higher of a violence rate than if we tried to do both solutions.
I don't think what you're saying works mathematically. If you reduce the overall rate by 20%, then it's not being raised by 5%. It's being reduced by 20%, regardless of what portion of that is gun violence.
Well, I'm not saying it's getting raised by 5%. I'm saying that's 5% we didn't also reduce it by. You could have further reduced it.
Can we just agree that guns represent their own unique corner in terms of the overall violence problem, and that's what we're here?
It has a differentiated problem. I will agree to that. I don't think it's unique.
That sounds like another way of saying unique.
Well, I don't think it's unique in terms of should we be stopping violence. Right? If our goal is to stop violence, then why consider just one area?
Okay, if we were talking about, say, sexual violence, would you not go for any solution that specifically targets that issue?
Well, is that our only goal here?
Well, we're here to...
Yeah, it's a gun control debate.
Yeah, it's a gun control debate.
Right, we're saying that gun control is not necessary to reduce violence.
Okay, let's start with the premise. Do we agree that...
And it's actually counterproductive to reducing violence.
Do we agree that gun violence is a problem?
We agree that it's differentiated from other violence, but not...
Okay, so do we agree that it's a problem or not? You just keep rephrasing that in a different way. Is it a problem?
It's not a...
People are committing violence against each other, and that's a problem, yes.
Why can't you guys just admit, yeah, it's a problem? Thank you. Well, there's a variety of different ways or methods you can take to reduce gun violence, all of which I'm sure... For example, there's a loophole in our background check system called the default proceed loophole, which allows a licensed dealer to sell a weapon after so many days if the background check has not yet completed. That should be closed.
So you're saying that if the background check never comes through, then that person never gets a gun, even if it takes 10 years.
Yes, that's called the default proceed loop.
So basically you're arguing for a backdoor gun ban.
Yeah, that's a clever reframe. No, I'm arguing that we allow background checks.
That's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. And all you have to do...
You wouldn't know what I'm talking about if you don't finish.
No, you said it yourself. That's why I asked you that question. And so all you would have to do is
here's my retort.
Let the background checks go through, and then no one gets guns.
One at a time.
So Shane's reframing what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that we do a backdoor gun ban. I'm arguing that we close the default proceed loophole. Obviously, gun background checks have to finish. All I'm arguing is that you do the background check, right? If you want to put a portion in law requiring the government to complete its background check, go ahead and put it there. But I'm saying you should have to complete a background check before you can obtain a gun. This shouldn't be controversial.
May I ask why?
And how many shootings would that have prevented?
Who knows? Well, we know it would prevent the shootings from Dylan Roof. He obtained his gun from...
No, he passed a background check.
No, he didn't.
He passed his background check.
I will provide you a link right.
Is there anything inherent in the nature of a background check which prevents shootings?
No, it forces somebody who wants to obtain a gun who is not allowed to have one to look to other methods.
Well, what do you mean they're not allowed to have one?
Well, I mean, by law, they wouldn't be allowed to have one because they're criminal, right? That's the whole point of a background check, to make sure criminals aren't obtained.
Do criminals obtain weapons regardless of background checks?
Yeah.
Okay. Do they do so illegally?
Yeah, if they're not allowed to have it, it's illegal.
Okay, well then, did that stop their shootings?
No, it's not going to stop every shooting.
It might stop some, though.
So, according to this link you've just posted, the only thing that would have stopped him from getting the gun was drug possession. And this is something else I've talked about, and I have this video called How to Argue for Gun Control where I go into this in more detail. But why should you say someone should not be allowed to have a gun because in college they were caught with a few ounces of a plant?
So I want to point out how you've just shifted the goalpost. The argument wasn't whether or not...
No, this is your link. This is your link. I'm going with your link.
You don't know what
you brought up Dylan Roof. You posted this link. I'm going with what the link says.
Shane.
One at a time.
Please, yes. So, Shane, you've moved the goalpost. Earlier, the point was that Dylan Roof was able to obtain his weapon despite the background check not completing. It was an example of a default proceed loophole. You said he obtained his weapon with the background check. I'm providing
he went through the background check. Your link says that. And what was happening was he was supposed to have been denied the background check because of the drug possession, but he wasn't. It didn't show up on the background check, so he got the gun. This is what your link says.
The background check never finished.
So there's nobody you'd want to prevent from getting a gun.
If someone has committed a violent crime and needs to be prevented from owning a gun, make it a function of sentencing after conviction. Don't do this blanket thing where we're just going to have this arbitrary list of people who might have just had an ounce or two of a plant and say none of them can get guns and just completely tear up the Constitution in the process.
Additionally, it's not about whether or not we want certain people to have guns or not. It's about whether or not they have the freedom to possess them.
Make it a function of sentencing. Follow due process. Follow due process.
Cool. Well, they passed it by law. It is due process. Anyway, Shane.
No, that's not how due process works.
You have to stop.
Due process means you have to go through the court system. You have to go through conviction and sentencing in order to do that. And if you tack on this extra thing later, no, hold on. If you tack on this extra thing later, that's called ex post facto, which the Constitution expressly forbids to both the federal government and the states. You cannot do that.
Okay, cool. So back to earlier. If I provide you part of that article that says that the 3-day waiting period did not complete and the firearm was sold to him anyway, would you be man enough to admit you?
I believe.
Yeah, I am, but I'm also seeing this part where it says he had been arrested on the felony drug charge, but not convicted. So he wasn't even. This wasn't even something he had been convicted of.
Okay, I provided the image. Mr. Roof exploited the 3-day waiting time that has allowed thousands of prohibited buyers to legally purchase firearms over the past decade, and some of those weapons were ultimately used in crime, according to court records and government documents. So, as I was saying earlier, Dylan Roof was able to purchase a firearm through a loophole called the default proceed loophole. So when I advocate for solutions to gun violence, one solution is to try to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. And one way you can try to do that is through a background check system.
But he wasn't a criminal. He wasn't convicted. He wasn't convicted. You're not a criminal until you're convicted. Innocent until proven guilty.
This feels like pedantry of the highest order. Are we going to pretend that
pedantry?
Proceed
Saying because he's not convicted is pedantry.
Shane, you are like so triggered. You got to calm down, dude.
Sanity Project, may I ask you a question?
I have a problem with that when you say that people who have not been convicted of a crime should be treated like criminals. Fuck yeah, I have a problem with that.
May I ask?
Okay, cool.
Liberal Sanity Project, what do you define as a criminal?
Somebody who's been convicted of a crime.
Oh, so it's not pedantry. He wasn't convicted of a crime, so he's not a criminal.
He was just an example of somebody who obtained a weapon through. Yeah.
So you've given me a definition. You've given me a definition, which I agree with, and I believe Shane agrees with, and we've proven how he doesn't fit that definition, and you call that pedantry. I don't understand this.
Give me a second here.
I don't see how it's pedantic to use your own framework.
I'm going to read directly from the article. The examiner found that Mr. Roof had been arrested this year on a felony drug charge, but not convicted. The charge alone would not have prevented him from buying the gun under federal law. That's what it says.
Okay, are we going to pretend the default... This is about the default proceed loophole. Do you acknowledge that there is such a thing as a default proceed?
In current law, there might be, yeah.
That wasn't the question. The question
was. Then you wanted an example, and then I provided an example.
This started when I asked you how many shootings would have been prevented by this. You brought up Dylan Roof as an example. You were saying that this would have been prevented, but since he wasn't convicted of anything, it wouldn't have mattered even if the background check had gone through.
Okay, let's assume some shootings would be prevented by this. Right? Certainly we can assume some people do not pass their background check and cannot obtain a gun.
Based on what premise?
On the premise that not everybody's a criminal mastermind and has a black market dealer to go to. Some people live in isolated areas. Some people it's too cost prohibitive to obtain a gun on the street, which is more... I'm just saying, we live in the real world. Certainly we can understand that not everybody's able to obtain a gun. Some people try to obtain a gun the legal means and can't because they're checked by a background check system. Do we agree that this is a thing?
Okay, so what you were saying is that there hypothetically are people out there who would have gone to get a gun, wouldn't have, and would have been stopped from committing gun violence as a result, correct?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
You were saying that there hypothetically are people out there who would have gone through this, been delayed in getting a gun, not been able to get one, and would not have been able to commit gun. Okay, I will acknowledge that hypothetical if you will acknowledge this one. Okay, just hypothetical situation. A woman is worried about this crazy ex-husband who keeps violating a restraining order. She goes to get a gun, can't get it because her background check is delayed, and then he rapes and murders her. Do you acknowledge that hypothetical?
Wouldn't the ex-husband also have an easy time getting a gun too?
The ex-husband doesn't need a gun. He's like 300 pounds and she's like 98 pounds and he can easily overpower her, beat her up.
Yeah, I acknowledge that's a thing that could happen. I also acknowledge that the reverse is more likely to happen. That more likely it's going to be a criminal who's rejected from getting... statistics on self-defense gun use.
Well, according to the CDC, it's anywhere between 1 million and 3 million times a year, several times more than
That's
the amount
not what the CDC said.
That is absolutely what the CDC said.
The CDC referenced a Gary Kleck study and then urged caution when said other studies.
They did the survey themselves. They did the surveys themselves over a 3-year period.
Shane, you have got to...
Yeah, let Liberal finish his sentence and then you can interject.
See, I think you're constantly interrupting because you know that I've read the same study you have. Yeah, the CDC...
Yeah, and you lied about it.
Oh, for fuck's sakes. Okay, so the CDC said that millions of self-defense gun uses happen per year. They also urged caution and said, but here are a bunch of other studies that suggest that the actual frequency of gun uses is much lower. Right? They referenced a study by David Hemingway that said it was about 100,000 per year. They referenced the National Crime Victimization Survey, which put it at 100,000 per year. So the data on self-defense gun uses is very contentious.
But the problem with the things like the NCVS is that they didn't ask everyone about it. They only asked a tiny subset and basically assumed that everyone else would have answered no.
Right. They're only going to ask people who already admit to being victims of crime, right? If you're going to use a gun in self-defense, it's implied you're already a...
And people who use a firearm to foil a crime largely do not consider themselves to be victims because they stop the crime from happening.
Okay, so what do you're going to highball the numbers with a selection bias and assume the numbers about 4?
What's the selection bias? This is the CDC's own survey where they didn't do that.
The variation in these numbers remains a controversy in the field. The estimate of 3 million defensive gun use per year is based on an extrapolation from a small number of responses taken from more than 19 national surveys.
Page the former estimate says nothing of the kind.
Okay, I'll post a screen.
Page 15 is the one where a little more than halfway down, it has a new section heading Errors in Surveys of Defensive Gun Use. That's what's on page 15 of this study.
I think this is
a screenshot.
This is Gary Kleck. No. You're not even reading the CDC. You're reading the study by Gary Kleck.
No. Gary Kleck went through the CDC's surveys.
Okay.
This is not his original study. This is not his original study where he came up. This is not his original study. This is where he went through the CDC archives.
Okay, on the CDC site, which I provided the link on that link, if you read that, that's the CDC study itself and not what Gary Kleck's writing about it. And if you go to chapter 3, page 15 of that study, which is what I provided, that's the CDC study, you can read what I'm talking about with self-defense gun uses. It says, here's the numbers, they're this high, but some caution is urged because other people say the numbers are this high.
If I may, quick reminder, you were the one who claimed to have been reading the same thing as Shane, not the other way around.
No, I think Shane said he was reading the same thing I did. I pasted this in chat.
That's not what I believe.
I pasted this in chat twice, dude.
That's not at all what was said. That is
okay, well, it doesn't matter.
And what you were looking at has nothing to do with these surveys that Kleck uncovered. The CDC basically buried those, didn't report on them, didn't even look at them after that, and what you're looking at, as far as I can tell, doesn't even mention them.
Okay, go to what I pasted in the chat. This is hard, but it shouldn't be. Go to what I pasted in the chat. Click on it. Go to page 15. It'll say defensive use of guns. This is the CDC study that was referenced earlier.
Are you talking about these BRFSS surveys that Kleck uncovered? Does it talk about those?
Dude, I have no clue.
We are talking. It's a series of studies that the CDC did in the late 90s and never reported the results, and Kleck uncovered them.
Wait, I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the all those were a bunch of other studies conducted the exact same way as Gary Kleck's original study, and he used that to claim that those studies verified his study, right?
He's saying that if you look through these CDC surveys, you get numbers that are in more or less the same range as his and a couple of others too.
Well, if you conduct the same study the same way, you're going to get the same results.
Well, it's not the same study conducted the same way.
Okay, so that's neither here nor there. The point is the numbers are contentious, right? There are other studies that say the numbers are much lower.
But the studies that say the numbers are lower are the ones that just discounted huge swaths of the population and just made assumptions that they wouldn't do any, that they didn't have any DGUs without asking them. How is that valid? Even if we say that it's highly contentious and highly suspect, since the burden of proof is on the gun control side to show that this damage wouldn't occur as a result, then you've basically just admitted that you don't really have the evidence for your side.
Burden of proof is on us to show that what damage would occur as a result.
The burden of proof is on the gun control side because you are advocating using force against other people. Anytime you advocate the use of force, the burden of proof is on you.
To prove what? We just took a weird left turn. What are we proving?
That you're using it correctly. Ethically, that is.
Using what ethically? We're playing with pronouns. Okay.
Aggression.
Using force.
You are making assumptions. You are making assumptions about the numbers of defensive
I'm making data-driven assumptions that the more guns you have in circulation, the more gun crime. By ignoring the
data you don't like.
Yeah, you've just claimed that the data is
I'm the one providing the data. What are you talking about?
You've just stated that the data is contentious.
That's not ignoring it. That's acknowledging that there's nuance in the field. That's the opposite of ignoring it.
Then
you're the one ignoring it when you say it's at
You didn't start off saying this was contentious and nuanced. You only did this after I posted this CDC study. they are basically ignoring their own figures that they collected in the 90s. They did not, in this study that you did, they did not even reference, as far as I can tell, those numbers. And in fact, apparently no one other than the CDC even knew about this until Kleck uncovered it.
Shane, they did reference those numbers. I pasted the part in chat where they referenced those.
From the BRFSS.
I have no clue, dude. I'm reading
the numbers that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the numbers that Kleck uncovered from the surveys they did in the 90s.
Okay, well then I don't
in the part.
Okay, cool. I don't think the CDC referenced numbers from the 90s. What I think they did was looked at all the available data on it that they had and said what the numbers were. And they said the numbers span this range, 100,000 to like 4 million. That's what the span is for self-defense gun use per year. I'm going to try to like move forward here. The issue is there more crime than there is self-defense gun use? I'm sorry, is there more gun crime than there is self-defense gun use? And the answer is yes.
Well,
how can you say that? You just said the numbers were contentious.
Yeah, I don't.
No, I said the number of self-defense gun use was contentious. Okay.
Yeah, and then you just said there's more crime than
the two.
I'm basing this on the research by David Hemingway of Harvard University. Says that for every one self-defense use of a gun, every one self-defense shooting that's justifiable, there's 4 unintentional shootings, there's 7 crime assaults or homicides, and there's 11 completed or attempted suicides.
It's from a study by Arthur Kellerman. From
sure,
that
one was discredited a long time ago. The Kellerman study has no validity to it whatsoever. That was discredited a long time ago.
How was it discredited?
I'd have to look it up, man. If you're going to throw studies at us that we never had a chance to review. So.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't reviewed it, how do you know it was discredited?
No, I have reviewed it, but this was like 15 fucking years ago or something. You can't expect me to have all this stuff right on the top of my head whenever you throw it at me. This is a fucking Gish Gallop.
We're going one argument at a time. You were saying the burden of proof was on us earlier. I'm providing proof.
I'm still trying to dig up the Hemingway thing, and now you've gone over to Kellerman.
Okay, I posted the Hemingway thing in the chat, right? It's about self-defense gun use. I provided it in chat. The place. I'll put the Hemingway study in the YouTube chat as well. But the epidemiology of self-defense gun use, evidence from the National Crime Victimization Surveys from 2007 to 2011. Results.
Well, that's the one we just talked about. We just talked about that, where they didn't ask people they only asked people who considered themselves to be victims of a crime. Anyone else, and in most cases of DGU, they don't consider themselves to be victims. We've been over this. They don't consider themselves to be victims because they foiled the crime.
Additionally,
and so when they ask them, were you a victim of crime? They'll say no, and so they never get asked the question.
Additionally, Liberal Sanity Project, you had copied something which said that data between these two sources was contentious. And this report that you've just brought me, the data they collected was from one of these contentious sources.
Yes.
So how can you say that we can't use the data that's contentious and form accurate conclusions, but they can?
I'm not saying you.
Well, I bring up it's contentious.
It's contentious when I bring it up too. We're presenting a narrative.
Well,
right?
How is it not contentious when Hemingway brings it up?
I just said it was. What are you asking? I've said it was. It's contentious for both of us.
Why is Hemingway's conclusion accurate then? How can we determine his accuracy any more than we can determine our own?
You can't, which makes this whole thing a canard insofar as this goes.
So why bring it up?
There's more data there, but if you'll shut the fuck up, I'll tell you. Hang on. There's more data to suggest that the number of self-defense gun uses is dwarfed by the number of gun crimes. That was the point I was trying to bring up.
Well, how can you compare the two when you're using data that you claim is contentious to begin with?
Well, we can discuss the inaccuracies of the data. You were bringing up the fact that it was Shane who was bringing up the fact that that it's possible that the number was underrepresented because there's people who foiled a crime who don't consider themselves victims of crime. It's also entirely possible that people might claim that they've prevented a crime when they haven't actually prevented a crime.
Certainly, but I don't see why we would bring up a conclusion based on the same data that we're working with, and then say that it's contentious when we use it, but not when they use it.
Literally, I think the fourth time I said this. It's contentious either which way, my dude.
Then why bring it up?
This was brought up earlier.
No, you brought up the Hemingway.
Okay, so this is how it's going to work. The work is contradictory. Yes, I agree. The work is contradictory. I'm citing Hemingway's work. You'll disagree with Hemingway's work, undoubtedly. Okay, that's fine. Okay, we're not against the idea of self-defense gun use. So this is a weird Eric quagmire we've wanted.
Well, I just don't see that you can use a conclusion which you agree is based on contentious data, but then criticize someone for using conclusions based on what you claim is contentious data.
Fair enough.
I don't think that's...
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. We can't use self-defense gun use at all. Neither of us can. The data's too...
Well,
right.
Okay, I'm fine with that if it means we move on.
Sure.
All right, so I've got a topic we could move on to. When we brought the CDC study up earlier, there's a part where it says, even when defensive use of guns is effective in averting death or injury for the gun user in cases of crime, it is still possible that keeping a gun in the home or carrying a gun in public, concealed or open carry, may have a different net effect on the rate of injury. And they bring up examples: suicide, homicide. So I think one of the things we need to discuss is whether or not having a gun increases risk of, let's say, suicide.
Well, what I would like to discuss, and I don't mean to take away from yours, but what I'd like to discuss is what gives someone the authority to start taking away people's property or to start restricting someone's ability to own property.
I think we can answer that question, but the issue is I think we need to establish that there's a problem before we start arguing about solutions, because otherwise we're arguing about solutions to a problem that we might not even agree exists.
Well, we can argue.
I think we agree that there's a problem. We just don't agree on the focus on guns, because you brought up suicides, like maybe if we got guns out of households, there'd be fewer suicides. Do you know how most people commit suicide?
Well, we know 20,000 of them commit suicide with guns.
Most people who commit suicide do it by swallowing pills. By far, it's like by far.
Okay, Shane, would you agree that if you take away a potential suicide method from a large number of people, it's possible quite a few of them will not commit suicide?
May I ask for us to take a step back? What is fundamentally... What is fundamentally causing us to prevent suicide?
The fact that people dying is bad?
Well, not necessarily, because we say that killing someone in self-defense is justified.
Sure, but...
So killing people is fine in certain situations. So does a man have a right to kill himself? That's the question here.
That's a debate. That's an entirely separate debate, dude.
Well, yes, but it addresses this problem. Right?
Okay.
Why focus on preventing suicide if a man has a right to kill himself?
Because generally we agree that people shouldn't commit suicide.
I say they shouldn't, but I don't say that they don't have the right to.
Okay, let's assume they have the right to. Generally they shouldn't. Can we agree on that?
Sure, but why would we prevent them forcefully from doing that which they have a right to do? That seems counterintuitive. That seems very disingenuous.
Into an argument about Ancapistan. This is not an Ancapistan argument.
No, this is an ethical argument. Well, this is an ethical argument.
No, right now it's a practical argument.
No, gun control is also a question of ethics, whether or not we have the ability to be regulating what people own. That is an ethical argument.
Toast, if you think somebody is really depressed, do you have any right to try to help them with their depression?
Oh, I can try to help them, but I cannot forcefully prevent them from committing suicide. I don't think that's...
But the state can. It can institute you against your will. That's what the state does.
Is that ethical?
Whether it's right or not?
Hold on, we've gotten off the track.
Is that ethical?
Yeah, wait. Okay, wait.
It's a separate discussion.
Take a pause, guys.
We've gotten off the track.
Yeah, take a pause, guys.
What you're talking about is like if someone has the gun and is pointing up to his mouth, should you run up and grab him, prevent him from it? That's not what you're talking about. You are talking about keeping guns from people just in general, on the thought that one day a few of them might commit suicide. That's a completely different thing.
Yeah, through waiting periods. That's not a bad idea. It saves people's lives.
Not if they need a gun to protect themselves from a bullying ex-husband. And
if your situation's that dire, you should be going to the police.
Guys, if I might...
They try. Do you have any idea how this works? They go to the police don't do squat, they go to court, they get a restraining order, they just ignore the restraining order.
Okay, that's neither here nor there. We're on the topic of suicide, so let's try to stay on the topic this time, right?
I was. So you went back to the other.
Guys, if I might interject, we probably should stay on the topic of gun control. We got a little bit off topic with suicide, and I think we should probably try to get back on the path of gun control.
Yeah, we're talking about gun suicides, right? This is related to gun control. A significant portion of gun deaths are suicide.
Once again, you haven't proven that any necessity to protect our own rights is there.
What evidence do you have? What evidence do you have that taking guns from people in the thoughts that some of them might commit suicide will not simply result in those people trying different methods of suicide?
Well, there's a bunch of ways.
Do you want another study? Because this is a study back.
Well, I mean, I've got one on how to argue for gun control because people keep looking at Australia, and I showed the suicide rate.
That's a non sequitur, dude.
Before, hold on. God, let me finish. Before and after the gun ban, the gun suicide rate fell pretty much at the same rate, and the gun ban doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. At the same time, non-gun suicides were actually going up and then went down. If anything, we should have seen an acceleration in the declining rate of gun suicides in Australia, and we don't.
Cool. Okay. Suicide rates and state laws regulating access to exposure. This is published by PubMed.gov, right? Results. Each law associated with significantly lower firearm suicide rates in the proportion of suicides resulting from firearms. In addition, each law, except for that which required a waiting period, was associated with lower overall suicide rate. So basically, states with waiting periods have lower suicide rates than states without waiting periods.
Okay, but do you have a before and after study like I just did? Because states can vary for all sorts of other reasons. But if you have, a state before or after passing the law like I just did with Australia, do you have a before or after study?
So people who want to buy guns immediately to commit suicide or to commit impulsive acts of violence are acting on an emotional fit. Right, that's the whole point of waiting periods, is it stops them from acting on an emotional fit that would ultimately be destructive to themselves or somebody else.
Well, you got a problem. You got a problem. You just read this out. In addition, each law, except for that which required a waiting period, was associated with lower overall suicide rate. So the very thing you're attributing to it, actually an exception in this study you just cited.
I have another question. Liberal Sanity Project, what's your position on something let's say, physician-assisted suicide?
Can we please not right now?
Well, I think this is relevant.
I'm fine with the idea of physician-assisted suicide. I'm not fine with the idea of people in emotional fits blowing their brains out.
For the record, I'm not sure if I'm.
Are you familiar with Washington State's physician-assisted suicide law?
No, does it let you shoot yourself in the head?
It's physician-assisted suicide. So
does the physician shoot you in the head?
If you would allow me to finish, are you familiar with the waiting period associated with physician-assisted suicide in Washington?
No.
Okay. Well, I can quote you the law if you'd like, but without doing that, I can tell you that it's quite a long process that takes several weeks.
Do you think that people who get physician-assisted suicide are committing suicide for the same reasons as people who are committing suicide by gun?
Are the reasons why someone commits suicide change whether or not they should have the ability to commit suicide, or with what they choose? Why is the method relevant here? If we're trying to prevent people from committing suicide, it's disingenuous to allow it one way, but to not allow it another way.
Okay,
you're having an entirely different debate.
It's contradictory. I'm showing that your position is entirely contradictory.
Toast, that's wonderful. Can you answer my question, though? Do you think the people who are committing suicide through physician-assisted suicide are committing suicide for the same reasons as people who are committing suicide with firearms?
The reasons are irrelevant, as I stated. The reasons and methods which someone commits suicide are irrelevant to whether or not we should prevent them from committing suicide.
Okay, Toast.
Okay.
The issue isn't the ethics of suicide. The issue is the ethics of gun control, right? We're here to talk about gun control.
Yeah, we're addressing suicide at the moment, right? Suicide from firearm usage, yes?
Yes.
If it's ethical for a man to kill himself, why would we need to restrict their gun usage to begin with?
You convinced me. It's unethical for everyone to kill themselves. All right, that's the axiom we're operating on. You can't kill yourself.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is,
you asked me the rule. That's the rule.
Well, then I disagree with you. Out of principle.
Toast, if it gets us off these ethical discussions, can I shoot you a hypothetical ethical situation?
I'm sorry?
All right, let's say hypothetically there is a person who is going to commit suicide with a gun. Now, in some alternate reality, he waits 10 seconds and decides not to commit suicide. Does that change the ethical dilemma of stopping that person from committing suicide?
No, because they have a right to do with their life however they choose, so long as it doesn't...
Even if 10 seconds changes their decision?
Yes, it's their decision. You just stated that.
Okay, so if somebody's committing suicide due to a completely irrational reason, and then after they cool off, they're suddenly acting rational, you'd consider their decision, while irrational, to be moral to allow to happen.
Are men allowed to make irrational decisions?
Sure, but usually you have.
Well, then why are we preventing someone from making an irrational decision? I don't see there's something with your logic that
you're
just
unironically arguing for suicide.
Excuse me.
Okay, guys.
I'm not arguing for suicide. I'm saying that if we're to say that suicide is ethical, we have to say that it's ethical no matter the method and no matter the reasons or the time.
Then we're going to do this. We're going to say our axiomatic position is that suicides are unethical. You should not kill yourself, and we want the state to enforce a waiting period so that people are dissuaded from killing.
May I ask what argument you're using to state that it's unethical?
My own feelings, the same one you're using to state that it's ethical.
No, that I'm not using feelings. I'm using a man's right to his own will.
That's called feelings, dude.
No, that's not called feelings. Are you familiar with the concept of will?
It's deontological ethics.
We're operating on very different frameworks and axioms here.
Well, let's come up with a clear framework.
Ethics. If you have a right to life, then you have a right to give up your life, just as if you have a right to own guns, you have a right not to own guns. If you have a right to marry someone of the same sex, you have a right not to marry someone of the same sex. What meaning would a right to life have without that?
You also have a right to not get shot, which is why we're here to talk about guns.
Okay, well, you cannot be shot while people still own guns.
Nice deflection.
Well, yes, because I want to stay on topic. That's why I'm deflecting. I'm deflecting back to the topic, Shane.
Well, you're the one who brought up suicide using firearms. So
because it's relevant to the topic. Because
well, then let's stay relevant on the topic then. Can you please tell me, by what axiom are you working on that does not allow a man to kill himself? How about you clarify that?
I can answer this for myself. My axiom is that, or the framework I use is I'm a utilitarian, and I axiomatically, my axiom is I decide that suffering should be reduced, happiness should be increased, and at least an equal ratio. I prioritize reducing suffering.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Let's say we were to agree that all forms of suicide are horrible and should be prevented at all cost. And so people who try to commit suicide should be prevented from having a gun. What ethical reason do you have for using that as a reason to keep guns from people who are not committing suicide, you don't have any reason to believe are going to commit suicide, but you're afraid that a few of them, not even all of them, might one day commit suicide? Because that's what you're talking about here.
Waiting periods put on a waiting period. It's not a ban on guns. You're not banned from having guns. You're just forced to wait for.
In my hypothetical situation with the small woman with the ex-husband, yeah, she was banned from having guns for the rest of her life.
Shane, does that happen as often as people commit suicide with guns?
I don't know. Does that matter?
From my ethical framework, it does.
So then, in your ethical framework, should we be able to just take someone, a perfectly healthy person, off the street, grab him, and harvest his organs to save 10 other people who need them?
No, because I prioritize reducing suffering.
Oh, so you're
but you are reducing suffering. You are reducing suffering. You're just making one person suffer and die, or not even die, because you can kill him humanely to help 10 people live.
Why don't you just ask the trolley problem? This feels like it's off topic. We're not making headway into our topic. We need to like move forward talking about guns, but we're stuck talking about a weird ethics.
Well, that's because this is a question of ethics.
Yeah, ethics is embroiled into the idea of gun control. There's no way around it.
Does that include children?
Children, I think it should be up to the parents to decide when they're old enough and mature enough to be able to handle it.
Okay, that's slightly more reasonable than what I expected you to say.
What did you expect me to say?
I expected you to say that we put a Glock in the backpack of every kid and be like, hey, Tim, you know what? Don't forget your weapon. You don't want to be less armed than the bullies.
No, I don't want to give 2-year-olds the right to keep and bear arms. Okay, so you're going to hate this, Shane, but what if I told you that as gun ownership goes up, so do gun crime, so do homicide? I have actually a chart I did from UN data that I can dig up if you want, showing the homicide rate of every country, and I'm not sure, I think it was more than just the OECD countries, but it was whatever was in this UN collection. And I did a scatter plot of the homicide rate on one axis and the guns per 100 population on the other. And the correlation was actually for lower homicides overall with a greater number of guns per 100 population. Okay, so I'm talking specifically about the United States, right? So if they're why are you talking specifically about, why do you get to think you get to just cherry pick one example and say it makes your point and ignore the worldwide data? Because the world is very different. Because looking at the gun crime rate of a place like Nigeria and comparing it to the United States is intellectually dishonest.
Wait, Shane, were you, for your graph, were you considering states, countries that are complete, like developing countries or third world countries? Because those aren't
I included every single country that was in this UN study. I'd have to go back to the data.
You didn't have a control?
What it was.
Which you didn't have a control?
I don't need a control for a scatter plot with a trend line. That's not how it works.
Well, this is like comparing the IQ of all humanity and like coming away with a weird conclusion when you don't control for the age of people in the IQ test. It's just so
Well, no, if you're going over the IQ for humanity, it doesn't matter what age they are. It's all of humanity.
Right, so
the average age for all of humanity is 100 by definition.
So the problem with including all those countries is some of those countries, they might have unique problems to them that could be increasing the homicide rate. They might have huge gang problems. They might be in turmoil. Their government might be crumbling.
This is typically why you want to compare
that it's lower, and that's why that's why you have the trend line. The whole point is to tease out all of that.
Sure. So you want to examine countries that are similar, countries with similar economies, similar governments, similar infrastructure. That's how you control and find like what the most common denominator is in homicides and crime.
Can you show
UK,
the reverse?
Switzerland, that sort of country.
Switzerland, yeah, sure.
All right, I posted the link there with the graph, and this has links to the data where I got it from. And so you see what I'm talking about. And yes, the R squared is small. It's like a little over 0.01. So yes, there are a lot of other things going on. But the whole point is when you tease it out, overall, countries have lower homicides. This is actually gun homicides specifically. Gun homicides per 100,000 population versus guns per 100 population. And the overall trend is lower.
Yeah, because you're including a lot of countries that you'd never.
Yeah, I'm not cherry picking.
Well, no, you have to cherry pick.
No, you don't want to cherry pick. Cherry picking's bad.
This is the worst methodology possible. You would get laughed at in any criminology textbook for this.
Shane, is Somalia more similar to the United States than the UK?
It's irrelevant. You claim,
it's
you claim that
irrelevant.
more guns mean more homicides. More guns don't even mean more gun homicides.
Okay, in the United States, more guns means more homicides.
Then why are there so many homicides and mass shootings in places like California and like in Chicago, where they have the strictest gun control?
Population density. Anyway, more guns, more homicides.
Well,
This is
hold
what
on.
most data suggests for the United States. Metadata from Harvard University, right? Which is a study looking at all the available studies on this, finds that more guns equals more gun homicides.
Liberal Sanity Project, I have a question. So our purpose, if I'm correct, is to reduce gun killings. In this case, homicide specifically.
Yes. And Shane's response was that
if that's correct, and you've just stated that there's a correlation between population density and that, why aren't you advocating for people to get out of densely populated areas?
No.
Is that not a correlation you just claimed?
No, we can claim that there's more than one reason why.
Well, certainly, but he's just said that this is a correlation. Why isn't this something you're advocating? Why allow people to live where they want to if it's going to cause gun crime?
Okay, the solution for this would probably fall under what we were talking about earlier about lowering violence overall.
No, but if this is something which causes violence, because you said there is a correlation, correct? Fantastic. So you did in fact claim that there's a correlation between densely packed areas, or population density specifically, and gun homicides.
Sure.
Okay, well, may I ask why you don't advocate for people not to live where they want to, specifically in densely packed areas?
Because we get more benefits out of people living where they want to than we get drawback.
Well, then, I think this is a question that utilitarians actually disagree on, right? Is someone's what is the worth of someone's life compared to the other benefits? What other benefits?
Does people not living together sound like the option with the most utility?
Well, that's not for me to prove. I can take either natural rights or I can take the deontological argument. I'm not arguing from a place of utilitarianism. I'm asking you for the utilitarian calculus on this.
So here's the facts. Gun crime is multifaceted. There are many. If assuming everybody had guns and nobody committed crime, there wouldn't be a problem. There are a lot of things that contribute to crime. Poverty contributes to crime. The drug laws contribute to crime. There's any number of different things that'll contribute to crime. Right? We're only seeking to control the ones that affect guns. That's what the topic of this conversation is.
Well, you claimed that this is one that specifically had a correlation to gun homicides. You said it was population density. So my question, and I will ask you again. How can you justify people living in densely populated areas? Or
I already did. You get more benefits out of people living together than you get losses.
I understand. Now I'm going to ask you for the utilitarian calculus. Are you familiar with that term?
No. Please tell me.
Okay, well, the utilitarian calculus is a form of calculus wherein you actually show the benefits versus the drawbacks. So I'm asking you to explain why.
Okay. You get more economic benefits than you have gun deaths. That the economic benefits outweigh the gun deaths.
May I ask how those are weighted against someone's life in the case of a gun homicide?
By my feelings, dude. There's no way you can weight life versus money.
So your entire ethical position is based on your feelings. Is that what you're saying?
Everybody's ethical position is based on their feelings.
Well, then I reject your ethical position because mine is not based on my feelings. Mine's based on
whatever you say, dude.
Nor is mine, and I gave you the ethical basis.
Does this really strike you as a gotcha?
Okay, guys.
Really strike you as a gotcha? Why don't people just not live together?
No, I'm saying that your entire position is untenable. That's not a gotcha. That's saying you should reconsider your position.
Firstly, my position is data driven. My position was in response to what Shane said, which is that the solution to people to gun violence was that we should arm more people. I provided data that said that that's not true. That as more people own guns, more gun crime happens.
We've also provided data that gun homicides are also caused by densely populated areas.
Okay, cool.
Well, then why are you...
Hold on, I've got a question for you. I've got a question for you.
I'm not being... yeah, fuck.
I've got a question for you. More people in the United States die from the flu every year than die from a gun homicide. Should we force everyone to get a flu vaccine?
I'm not against that.
So you're for government coming in, holding people down, and shooting their arm full of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. To keep us all safe, sure.
If it reduces the amount of suffering, then yes.
Okay, so how many other things can you apply that to, and how much is Big Brother going to come in? Because there's a lot of things that kill a lot more people than gun homicides.
Shane,
okay, but we're only here to talk about guns.
How many aspects of our lives? No. You were the one who brought up the utilitarian calculation.
No, I didn't. It was forced on you, dude.
Yes, when you were talking about population density, you were saying that it's better to live in...
In response to you saying California has a higher rate of gun harm.
In response to you saying there was a correlation between gun ownership and... Talking to a wall here.
Okay, if I may, I think that your position is not tenable here. Let's consider this. Everything that would go against someone's happiness, everything that would be degrading to someone's happiness, would you say that those things should be stopped before we start maximizing happiness? This is in response. This is to Red, specifically on prima facie utilitarianism.
I also value people's will, just not to the same extent as you guys.
Oh, may I ask why?
Because if I were not to value people's will, I'd have to bite the bullet on stuff like, okay, like killing, enslaving half the population to keep the other half more happy and stuff like that.
Well, that's more taken care of by the prima facie duty of non-maleficence, right? Non-malevolence, excuse me. But I will still say that I don't think it's tenable to both respect someone's will, but then turn around and disrespect it where you choose. Where's the delineation there?
And really, what is the option other than people's will? Because if you're talking about, oh, well, act against the will, well, there has to be someone else with the will to act against them. You can't get around people's will here. It's just different people.
If you guys are going to be throwing deontological traps at me, I should be allowed to throw a utilitarian one at you.
Well, no, we're questioning how your position is tenable as a utilitarian.
All right. So how can I justify impeding on someone's will in certain situations but not others?
Sure. Where's the delineation?
All right. So I can't give an exact point, but I would say that when the amount of suffering is large. So, for example, if something's causing a lot of deaths, I'm probably willing to impede on somebody's will to some extent to stop it. But I'm not willing to impede on somebody's will to an enormous extent. Like, let's say I wanted to prevent all suffering in the world. I could do that by throwing every individual person in the world into a prison cell and preventing them from ever interacting with each other. But that's not something I'm going to say yes to because that impedes on their will way too much.
So you would contradict your entire idea of, maximizing, or I'm sorry, minimizing, suffering, but maximizing utility or happiness.
No, I hold two different axioms.
Okay, well, they're contradictory in this case. Would you agree with that? One is overriding the other?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Well, may I ask then why you hold a contradictory premise?
Why I hold a contradictory premise? Because, all right, if you try to operate under more than one, if you only try to operate under one axiom, it leads to some weird conclusions. Now, I understand that when you try to operate under multiple axioms, you end up with some sort of balancing act. The issue is where I decide where to balance them.
Well, we operate on one premise, generally. I mean, some ANCAPs operate on different premises, but generally it's one premise. So my question is, how is yours consistent but ours isn't?
Well, you're not letting me question your premise to demonstrate why it's either inconsistent or why you'd have to bite the bullet on some really weird shit.
Oh, certainly, but will you admit that yours is inconsistent?
No, I just have to decide where I'm going to balance it. These two axioms.
You said that your two axioms contradicted one another in this scenario.
No, I just have to choose which one outweighs the other one in different situations.
Yeah, so because they contradict one another.
I got a question for you, Red Bat. Earlier, you said that you would only go against the will when the suffering or whatever was large enough. My question for you is, who decides what is large in that context?
I guess I do.
But unless you're the dictator of America, you're not going to be the one making those decisions.
Sure, but you could extend that to everybody. You can't say, okay, my deontological framework should be applied to absolutely everybody. Well, actually, you can say that, but you can't actually apply it.
That's the categorical imperative. Kant spoke about that.
Yeah, I mean, our position is that people, should be left alone to make those decisions for themselves, and government or whoever should only step in to use force, not just government, but anyone else should only step in to use force when that person is initiating force against another.
So to get this back on track, are you guys in favor of any gun law?
Well, like I said earlier, if you have someone who has committed, this horrible crime, and you think they should be prohibited from using guns for, 10 years after they're released from prison or whatever, then sure, make that a function of sentencing. Make it a part of the justice system. Let it be where their lawyer can go up, their defense attorney can go and make arguments against it. Why, that's not really a good thing to do in this case, and it's going too far or whatever. Use due process, but yeah.
I'd like to also add, because the question was posed to both of us, there are forms of law which are voluntary and which could be considered gun laws. And I have no problem with voluntary law.
In the United States, is there in the United States right now?
If you have like a store owner who posts up that he doesn't want anyone carrying guns in his store on his private property, then yeah, it's his private property, and you can either conform to what he wants or go somewhere else.
Okay, so should there be any government law against crazy people buying guns?
Well, our position is that there shouldn't be a government. I don't think it's quite fair to ask that question. Our response.
I know. I'm trying to gauge this. Yeah, well, the reason I'm trying to gauge.
I'm going to play along and say, okay, we'll go with the fact that there's a government. What should they do about crazy people?
Sure.
Again, there are processes where you go through to say, this person is not able to make decisions for themselves, and they should be locked up or whatever. In my case, this is actually personal because my son is an adult, but he's autistic. He's not able to make a lot of decisions for himself, so the court has declared me his guardian. I make decisions on his behalf. So if something like that would happen, it would have to be done, me doing it on his behalf.
So would you buy into the idea that the government could be considered something like a parent to a citizen in the same way that a parent is?
Absolutely not.
You would not subscribe to that idea at all?
Not at all.
All right. Why wouldn't you subscribe to that idea?
Because government isn't a parent in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't even know most of us. It doesn't care. Parents know their children. Parents care about their children. They're genetically programmed to. Yes, some parents are bad and you have to take the child away. But for the most part, parents know their children better than anyone else, better than the teachers, and certainly better than politicians in Washington or wherever.
There's nothing to suggest that the relationship between a government and any particular individual is that of a parent to a child. I mean, there might be some authority, but that's it. If every position of authority becomes a parenting position, then we've basically gotten rid of the entire differentiation between what parent means and what authority means.
And you've also just backdoored, legitimized all authority, because any authority that comes in, you could say they're a parent. 1984, it was actually called Big Brother. Everyone needs to read that book.
Well, you can have bad parents too. So just because I say the government could be like a parent doesn't mean it's necessarily a good parent. You could have a good parent, a bad parent, a good government, a bad government.
Well, once again, if we say that the state, because of its position of authority, you can bring up other ways that they're similar to a parent. I'm fine with that. But if we say just because of the position of authority, we have to get rid of the differentiation between any particular group of authority over an individual, and the role of a parent, which I don't think is accurate, nor is it useful. There's a reason we call some groups parents, and there's a reason we call some people having authority, having a position of authority. There's a difference.
All right, my reason for bringing up this analogy is because sometimes the government passes laws that are to prevent people from hurting themselves rather than just to impede on people's freedoms. So we could argue that gun control could be something like that.
And I'm against those laws.
Is that everything that a parent does? If we're still making that?
No, of course, there's other things that a parent does.
Well, then there's something differentiating it, isn't there?
No, but in this particular instance, the relationship could be seen as an analogous.
Well, I asked you whether or not there was a difference in the relationship.
Sure, it's not like a perfect analogy. I mean, obviously, the government didn't give birth to you.
Well, I don't think the analogy's poor. I think it's logical. Right?
All right, let me ask you this. I'm 50 years old. I've been on this planet a half a century. I have never once been arrested for anything, never committed a crime in my life, never caused a traffic accident or anything like that. You know, I have spent my whole life being a mature, responsible adult who's never really been any threat to anyone else. What makes someone in Washington who, let's face it, most of them can't make that claim, what makes them worthy to be a parent over me?
Well, I would say the voting process, but you disagree because you're an ANCAP.
Well, even with the voting process, you know, my vote doesn't matter. None of the guys I vote for ever get in.
Okay, so back to guns. I want to point out that you've both done exactly what I said would like be the problem at the beginning, like where we propose ideas and you shoot them down because they conflict with your idea of a state, right? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how severe.
I've been trying to go along with the idea of the state. I've been going along with, you know, the state is parent or the state is this, the state is that. I've been trying to go along with that.
Yeah, and we've also questioned the ethical premise. Hold on, we've also questioned the ethical premise.
Okay, so it doesn't matter how severe the problem is. Your entire working premise is that if it involves the state, this specifically to you, Toast, then it shouldn't happen because it's unethical. And
well, no, we can operate. We can operate with a state.
Any solution that okay, well, then tell me your solutions that involve.
What do you mean? Tell me.
Gun control necessarily involves a state, right? Tell me any solution you have that involves a state.
No, what I'm saying, I'm not here to say my own solution to the problem. I'm here to say, if I'm going to argue for the state, I'm going to say that your solution is not tenable. I'm not saying that I have all the answers.
This is not tenable. No, hang on. Can I respond real quick? This argument that because we can't solve every gun death or that it's not necessarily tenable, that we shouldn't solve any, is a nirvana fallacy. That
it's not that you can't solve any of them.
No one said that. Don't straw man us.
I'm not saying that you can't solve any of them. What I'm saying is that I'm saying that your position is not even usable within your own framework here of a state.
Okay, why? Why are background checks not usable within a state?
Let me ask you this question. I was going to ask you.
Why can't you answer it?
No, I can. What's the framework for a state? What's the ethical framework for a state?
Okay, we're not unethical or ethical. Background checks can work with a state.
Well, is your state being ethical?
Okay, yeah, my state's being ethical.
Okay, then I need to know your framework.
Can background checks work?
I need to know your framework then.
My framework is that a state has a right to regulate weapons, right? The state's a necessary evil to govern our lives. That's my position. Okay, can a state have background checks? This is, again, I'm proposing solutions and you're shooting them down because it involves.
I don't think your framework is tenable then. Ergo, okay. your state isn't tenable.
Can you define tenable for me? Because I don't think. Can you define tenable for me? Because I don't think you're using it in the same way.
Sure, let's use the common definition, and if you'd like, I can quote it verbatim. Able to be maintained or defended against attack or objection. Do you agree that that's the definition of tenable? Has it how I have used it?
Sure.
Okay, well then, I would say that's how I used it.
Okay, so how are background checks not able to be defended against an attack or an?
Well, because I can object to your framework.
I've given intellectual objections to them in this very discussion.
Okay, great. So background checks, you can object to them. Does that mean background checks don't work? Does that mean background checks are a bad idea? That's what I want to talk about.
Not necessarily, but because your framework is not tenable, you can't say that the conclusions are tenable.
Do you think there's such thing as an untenable idea?
What do you mean an untenable idea? Could you hold an idea which is
a tenable idea? Is there such thing as an idea?
Certainly, there are some things which hold to be true. Given a tenable premise, you can form tenable conclusions. For example, if we say that the current system of mathematics as we know it is correct, then we can form plenty of conclusions. Now the question is whether or not our current system is correct. I certainly think it is. It's been correct every time I've used mathematics. That's tenable. So I'm not concerned about whether or not background checks are tenable or untenable, or government is ethical or unethical. I'm concerned about whether or not they work.
Define work.
Prevent some people from obtaining guns who shouldn't obtain guns.
Who shouldn't obtain guns?
To a greater degree than you're preventing people from defending themselves or whatever?
Ideally.
No, not ideally. Just as your basic premise.
Yes. Again, this feels like a nirvana fallacy, that if I don't have a solution that solves all gun violence...
It's not a nirvana fallacy. You're just talking about...
It is.
No.
Can we really not come together on the idea that criminals shouldn't own guns?
No, you're talking about preventing X, and I'm saying, well, what if preventing X causes harm to a number of people that's greater than X? That's not a nirvana fallacy.
Okay. Do you think background checks cause more harm than they prevent?
I'm not positive on that. I think they might, and since the burden of proof is on the people who advocate for background checks, I would say that position is unproven, and I reject it.
Do you think criminals should be legally allowed to purchase guns?
Define criminal.
Somebody convicted of a crime.
In sentencing, this is
pedantry of the highest order.
No, this is not pedantry. This is not pedantry. This is what I've been trying to make the whole time.
Okay, let's say Congress passes a law that says anybody convicted of a crime can't purchase a weapon. Do you agree with this law?
No, because it's ex post facto.
May I ask why Congress saying something is ethical? How that makes it ethical? Isn't that just relativism?
You can't ask that question. No, it's not relevant. I'm not going to talk about it.
I'm going to go ahead and ask the question anyway. It's your choice whether to respond to it.
Again, this is nothing but nirvana fallacy and pedantry constantly. There's no way I can get through to you guys.
I don't think you understand what a nirvana fallacy is.
That's where if I can't propose a perfect solution, you would nitpick at it because it's not.
It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be.
All right, guys. Can we take a quick breather? I was told by Mr. Dapperton to read a $50 super chat someone gave. So take a little breather so I could read this. Alrighty. Anthony says, state incompetence has killed, currently kills, and most likely will continue to kill due to negligence on the part of qualified professionals overburdened with bureaucratic processes, renders all attempts to add new policy futile.
Yeah. I think he's trying to argue that the state is incompetent, so should we
basically
add more
anything the
policy?
state does will result in death.
No, he didn't say that. Now you're doing the nirvana fallacy.
Yeah, Shane.
What?
So
I'm saying what the super chat said.
He doesn't say that. I'm reading it right now.
Okay, state incompetence has killed, currently kills, and most likely will continue to kill due to negligence on the part of qualified professionals overburdened with the bureaucratic process. How does that differ from what I...
Yeah, because he's not saying that...
He's not giving absolutes like you were.
Okay, what did I say? Please repeat to me what I said.
I don't remember the exact words.
Then don't say I'm straw manning, please.
Why don't you repeat it? Why don't you repeat it then? You say what you tell us what you said.
I said what he's saying is that state incompetence kills people.
That wasn't what you said. I think anyone who plays this video back will see that's not what you said.
Okay, please tell me the difference between what I said.
The difference is you were being absolutist, and I don't remember the exact words, but you were saying that it was like 100% of whatever.
State incompetence has killed. That's the very first sentence, dude.
Yeah. Do you deny that?
No, that's not relevant whether I deny it or not. The point is you're saying I'm strawmanning and I'm not. I'm summing up what he said. State incompetence kills people. That's what he's...
Well, no, it's not a nirvana fallacy.
Nobody's talking about a nirvana fallacy. Good Lord.
Well...
You said a minute ago it was a nirvana fallacy.
It's what you claimed.
I'm quoting the super chat. The super chat said that state incompetence kills. Then you said I was strawmanning the super chatter because I was talking in absolutes. Then I asked you to tell me what was different from what I said to what the super chat said. Then you asked me to repeat what I said. Then I repeated what I said, and I'm still asking, what's the difference? You said it was absolute? No, I'm repeating what the first line of the super chat.
Did you not claim that it was a nirvana fallacy?
I haven't made a comment on the super chat, dude.
Then how could we have objected to something you said about the super chat?
I think you're just contrarian for the sake of being contrarian.
You say that you haven't made a comment on it, but then how could we have possibly objected to anything you said? I'll say this. It doesn't matter whether or not you can solve all of them or even one or two. What we're saying is that you can't advocate for someone to do something which violates your own ethical framework. Is that correct?
Sure I can. I'd just be inconsistent.
You'd be unethical for doing so.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
May I ask what about being unethical is intellectually honest?
Toast, couldn't he just advocate for it as an egoist?
Well, certainly, but again, it's not intellectually honest.
To advocate for a policy as an egoist?
If you're saying that you don't mind you being unethical, then what gives you any rational basis for complaining when other people are unethical?
I don't think I've complained that anybody's being unethical. I'm trying to talk
I was talking to Red Bat.
You guys are trying to talk about ethics.
I was talking to Red Bat.
Well, an egoist, from my understanding of egoism, I haven't really read nuts on it, is they want what is ultimately best for them, and they'll justify what's good for society because it comes back to being best for them. So they could be unethical according to their expectations of other people and still be consistent.
If I might modify that slightly, some egoists don't necessarily believe that it's society which should be optimized for their own benefit. Some believe that it's solely their own benefit.
Are you talking about some kind of Ayn Rand virtue of selfishness thing, or is this something else?
I think Ayn Rand is an egoist. I'm not sure. Well, the idea is you create a better society because it ultimately benefits you, and you have a selfish reason for doing so.
Well, is that something that you can hold as a position?
Two people can have conflicting ideas on what makes a better society. A fundamentalist Christian might say it will be a better society if everyone's Christian, so we'll force everyone into churches and try to make them Christian.
Well, if you're a Christian egoist, that sounds like a consistent position.
Yeah. If you're saying that egoism is the way to go, or whatever, however you would say it, what would give you any business complaining if someone tried that?
Can you say that again? If somebody tried what?
If someone tried herding people into churches and forcing them to be Christians.
A non-Christian egoist would argue that he wouldn't want that to happen to him, so he'd argue against it.
But on what intellectual basis can you do that? If you're arguing, it's just self-defeating, because you're just saying, I want to do what I want, someone else wants to do something different. There's no way to judge which position is better than the other.
Sure, but you could argue that with ethics in general.
But deontological ethics, it's derived logically from first principles.
Okay, why do you value first principles?
Because they work. You take the principles of non-contradiction and consistency and apply them long enough, and you can wipe out smallpox and put a robot on a comet.
That's circular reasoning.
How is that circular?
Because you're saying that you should rely upon first principles, and then when I asked you why, you said because they work.
Well, we can say that they've been proven to work.
Yeah, I mean they're intellectually defensible. They're logically justifiable. They're not based on my feelings or my ego or my own personal subjective view of the world or anything like that.
Essentially, he's saying that they're tenable. It's a tenable position.
Oh man, I feel like I'm arguing with the inverse of ask yourself.
Oh, okay.
Can you bring up a reason why it wouldn't be a tenable position?
Why deontology wouldn't be a tenable position?
Well, yeah.
Okay, let's say every single person in the world is dying of a disease, and they're all going to die in 10 years. I have the only cure. I have enough of a cure to cure everybody in the world. How do you get that cure without violating the non-aggression principle if I don't want to share it?
I offer you something that would be worth it to you, whether it's money or whatever. We'll give you your own island in the Pacific or whatever.
I refuse because I want everybody to die.
Are you operating by the same?
Why do you have a cure?
Yeah. Again, are you operating by the same deontological ethics as everyone else in this world? Because that's what we're trying to address. Well, then why are you using that as a defense against deontological ethics?
Because not everybody has the same system of ethics.
Okay, but hold on.
Well, that doesn't make the system right or wrong in and of itself.
You asked about my ethics. I'll ask you about yours. So you've got this cure you don't want to share, and you're an egoist, and someone decides that they're going to come up behind you, bash you over the head, grab the cure, run off with it, and cure everyone. On what intellectual basis do you refute that action and say that action is improper?
I don't. That's the action I think you should take.
No, but I'm talking from the point of view of, you said you have the cure and you don't want to share. I'm talking from the intellectual of that person, the person who has the cure and doesn't want to share.
Well, that person obviously doesn't want to die, but that person shouldn't get to dictate whether or not everybody on the planet gets to die.
You're still avoiding the question. What intellectual basis would that person have for complaining that he was, hit on the head based on his own system of ethics?
Well, if he's an egoist, then he could say, "This violates my ethics. My ethics is going to be what's best for me."
Okay. If I may, I feel like we've gotten way off topic here. We're talking about ethics and stuff. Is there a way we can kind of try to spin this back into the topic at hand, which is obviously gun control? Because I can notice people
I have to disagree with you.
Shane, earlier you brought up an idea of a woman who needs to get a gun in order to defend herself. What would you say about the idea that men are more likely to own guns, therefore the guy who's coming to kill her is more likely to have a gun anyway?
Well, I would say that it doesn't really matter if he murders her with the gun or his bare hands, but they both have bare hands. She can't compete with him on the basis of bare hands. But if they both have a gun, then at least it's equal. It's pretty much 50-50.
Do you think more guns equals less rapes?
If the would-be rape victims have guns, absolutely, and I can show you a study on that.
Okay, what about in terms of national statistics? Because
I believe this was national. Yeah, I'd have to look it up again, but
because I'm reasonably sure that, with a few exceptions of countries that define rape in weird ways, the U.S. actually has more rapes on average than Europe, and that's per capita.
I think this was just the U.S.
Oh, well, if you have data for gun ownership between states with high rape rates between states with high gun ownership versus states with low ownership,
this was actually looking. I've posted a link to the video where I believe I put this. They were actually examining, not state by state or whatever, but examining what happens when women who use force to oppose a rapist as opposed to women who simply do nothing. And they broke it down by the women who try to fight off physically, women who fight off with a knife, and women who fight off with a gun. And they show it's far, far, far more effective to fight them off with a gun.
Sure, but you could make the claim about an assailant. An assailant has a better chance of killing somebody with a gun. I mean,
But again, we're just back to it being equal. If the assailant has a gun and the victim has a gun, at the very least, it's going to be 50-50. So it's at least tipping the balance somewhat towards the would-be victim.
In a vacuum, I agree with you that guns are a force equalizer. The issue is just there's other things we need to consider. Like maybe the rapist feels that he has a better chance of getting away with it because he has a gun that he can hold up to her head or something. I don't know if there's been any studies.
This is something I don't have any links on this. I would have to go and dig it up. But a bunch of years ago, they actually asked a whole bunch of convicted criminals, people convicted of violent crimes, would you have committed this crime against this person if they had been armed? And overwhelmingly they said no. And many of them I believe were armed when they did it. So just the armed victim is apparently something they really don't want to encounter. They want someone who's helpless to make it easy for them. They don't want the armed victim.
Well, that sounds like they know the victim is armed beforehand.
Or at least there's a good possibility. Here's another thing I remember. I think it was Orlando, but don't quote me on the exact city. But basically they had passed some kind of new concealed carry or whatever where, there was a possibility that more people would be carrying guns. And when that happened, they started, it was one big, tourist city like Orlando. When that happened, they started targeting tourists because tourists generally aren't armed because you can't, take a gun on an airplane. So they started targeting the tourists because they knew there was less of a chance that the tourists would be armed.
Would you argue that since guns are a deterrent, would you say that they would deter mass shootings?
Now, this we actually do have some statistics on, and I linked to this as well from How to Argue for Gun Control. It wasn't formalized or peer-reviewed or anything. I'd love to see someone do something more formalized, but a guy named Davi Barker went through this whole list, and he actually goes into, how he compiled this list and where he got the data. But he looked at a bunch of mass shootings, and when the mass shooter was stopped by police, the death toll was like 14 point something. When it was stopped by an armed citizen, the death toll was like 1.8.
All right, but that's for how many people they kill per mass shootings. I'm talking about as a deterrent, like preventing the mass shooting from happening.
Well, how many mass shootings have there been at a gun show? Why do mass shootings keep taking place in gun-free zones?
Because they probably think they can get a bigger body count.
Exactly.
Well, why is
people
that?
Aren't armed.
All right, let's say every single building in America had armed citizens. I don't think that we wouldn't see any mass shootings at all. If you look through the list of the most famous mass shootings,
well, I wouldn't claim that, but that's a Nirvana fallacy there. But so I wouldn't claim that, but they wouldn't get very far.
Sure, but I don't necessarily think. I think all it does is deter people from going to the places where people have guns. They'll just attack the least armed place there is, assuming they're even being rational. So,
we've seen cases like that, like the guy who shot up the movie theater where Batman was playing. I forget his name, but there were several theaters that he went by that he could have gone to, some of which were even more crowded, but he bypassed them all and went to this one. And the difference seems to be that this one explicitly said, no one is allowed to carry guns. They had, the gun-free zone, no guns allowed, or whatever sign it was on the door. He went past all those other theaters to go to that one.
All right. Yeah, I saw that in your video. My question is, how would guns act as a deterrent for the Vegas shooting? That seems like the oddball that I don't think
that is kind of an oddball. I would say that a close one that's close to that was the University of Texas shooting, where the guy was shooting from the tower. There were people who were armed there, and they fired back. They weren't able to hit him at that range, but they were able to keep him ducking down so that at the very least he couldn't kill as many people before, the police or whoever it was finally got to him and stopped him. So they were at least able to minimize the body count. And there were people who, I remember that there was an interview from one guy who was there, and he was armed and he saw where it was coming from. And he said that the reason he didn't shoot back was that he was afraid of being mistaken for the shooter and shot himself.
So, you think the body count would have decreased if you had a concert full of people with guns shooting into a hotel? That sounds like a huge mess to me.
Well, wasn't it a huge mess to begin with? Isn't it a lot better to shoot at one guy in a hotel room than a whole crowd full of people at a concert?
Yeah, but there's other people in the hotel.
It was 300 yards away, dude. And I think given the situation, most people probably would have shot other people shooting at the hotel, not knowing where the shooting was coming.
Yeah, that would have been a huge
they said they saw the room it was coming from. They were able to point it out to the police. Your worst case scenario is things happening exactly the same as it did, and there are other scenarios where you actually reduce the body count. So I don't see what your point here is. I mean, it's still going to be bad no matter what.
So
the question is what's the best policy? What has the best possibility of reducing the amount of carnage?
This is similar in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shane, to the Pascal's wager. Not necessarily in premises, but we're considering the various outcomes. Either we have a large body count, or we have the potential for not having a large body count, or just the same body count.
What if I propose something that isn't a law that might have stopped this shooting?
Go ahead.
Okay, what if hotels as a policy have to check your bags?
Well, they can certainly do that. The question is, would it have stopped him?
Well,
I mean, people who are going to commit crimes aren't generally known for complying with things like baggage checks or whatever.
So, if I may, if I'm a hotel owner, why should I have to check every individual's bags?
Well, to prevent another Vegas shooting.
Well, I don't think you were saying they have to. You said you weren't talking about a law, just if the hotel had that policy.
I believe they mentioned the word law.
No, I said not a law. It's like we could.
Okay. That's my bad. I apologize.
We're using a sample size of 1 here, so I don't really, because usually things like that aren't repeated. The 9/11 hijacking isn't going to happen again because people are too on the lookout for things like that. Terrorists think of, other things to do. So,
all right, let's see if I can get you to agree with another possible solution. All right, so something that people are always saying is X building should have had armed guards. Y building should have had armed guards. Now, obviously, we can't get armed guards in every single building in America, but what if, I know you guys don't agree with taxation, but what if you have a tax exception for buildings that include a certain amount of armed guards for certain events?
Like if they have a certain amount of private security, then they don't owe as much taxes to pay for the police.
Yep.
Well, there's a pragmatic concern. A, you're using perverse incentives, and B, there's also the ethical argument, which I don't necessarily want to get into, but...
Well, don't you agree that if we had armed guards who are in uniform, they'd be able to pull out a gun and shoot at the bad guy without being mistaken for the bad guy themselves? Excluding the fact that we just had 2 incidents where that didn't work.
You said yourself they can't be everywhere, so let me add another factor into this equation. What if someone in the hotel room right next to him had a gun and was able to run straight over and shoot him from there?
You mean like somebody in the hotel next to the Mandalay ran in and shot him? No.
Someone in the same hotel, like right next door, the next one, or across the hall or something.
Where
he just grabs his gun, runs across the hall and shoots him.
I guess the security guard would have to respond after the shooting, but again, this would be another one of those things. Maybe we could have people check.
You're saying that security guards, can't be everywhere, but if you have other people who are armed in the vicinity, they wouldn't necessarily have to be shooting up from the crowd below. If someone is in the hotel room across the hall, he can actually get there a lot faster than the police or even an armed guard can. If the armed guard's on the ground floor and has to go up the elevator or run up a bunch of stairs, he just has to run across the hall.
Well, it's also possible that you could have people bringing guns into a hotel and and they're not able to respond quickly either. Maybe they left the gun in the other room.
Okay, so now you're back to it just being as bad as it was before.
Sure, but it sounds like your solution is prone to the same...
My solution opens up possibilities.
Well, it sounds like it's prone to the same pitfalls as my solution.
Why is that? I mean, I'm not proposing the use of aggression against anyone.
Well, wait, you'd say a security guard defending a hotel is aggression?
Oh no, I thought we were still debating gun control. Gun control is aggression. A security guard isn't, but you've already established the security guards can't be everywhere. But if a certain number of people in the population are armed, they can be a lot closer than any policeman or security guard or anyone who can respond faster. That's the reason, as Davi Barker shows, that's the reason why that number goes way down when a citizen engages the mass shooter. Then, by the way, the number still goes down even when the citizen isn't armed. It just doesn't go down as far. But, it's because, when seconds count, the police are just minutes away, but an armed citizen could just be right there and step right up and take care of it.
Would you say more armed citizens would also equal more bad guys with guns?
I would say that it might be more bad guys with guns, but there would be far, far greater proportion of new good guys with guns, because bad guys generally don't follow laws. That's kind of the definition of criminal. Well, and so you've got maybe you've got a few criminals who were stopped by it, but you've got all sorts who aren't. But, law-abiding citizens are going to abide the law and not get guns. But if you say that now it's legal for them, then yes, a far greater proportion of them, additional amount of them proportional to the whole, will have guns than additional bad guys. And when you add to that on top of it, there are far, far, far more law-abiding citizens than there are bad guys. I think it's massively outweighed.
Hold on. So let's say we have two hypothetical universes. One where somebody has to buy a gun off the black market, and one where it's easier to buy a gun legally. So this guy doesn't buy off the black market. He just walks into a store and buys the gun. They both intend to use the gun to commit a crime. What's the difference? You have less crime, but you have the same amount of violence.
Well, the difference is in the one universe that doesn't have gun control, there's a greater chance that there's an armed citizen nearby who can stop him.
Well, the issue I have with these good guy with guns arguments is most of these shooters were good guys with guns up until they started firing. Paddock would have been considered a good guy with a gun until he opened fire into the concert.
Well, is there any justification for taking away the guns from the good guys who don't turn?
Yeah, most good guys are not going to turn and go shooting a bunch of people at a concert.
Well, that's just getting back into ethics. My justification will always
if I may, this debate is a question of ethics. We're considering whether we ought to legislate against guns. Right? We're considering whether we ought to implement gun control. This is necessarily an ethical dilemma, and I don't understand why the opposition here seems to not want to consider the ethical dilemma.
Because the issue is, I'm probably never going to convince you to my ethics, and you're probably never going to convince me to your ethics. So it's kind of like saying, okay, we'd be arguing back and forth. We'd eventually be just talking over each other. I just want to go by who's making the better points.
Well, if you're not willing to have your own mind changed, then why are you in a debate?
I'm willing to have my own mind change. It's just when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about something like really fundamental. Like that's not something that's going to change in one discussion.
Well, what would change your mind? Because all the points you've brought up, we've had counters to, and you haven't changed your mind yet. So what would change your mind?
Well, it's a lot of the points that you had counters to were based around ethics. Like, why should I implement policies that would make it harder for certain people to defend themselves?
Well, once again, I'll reiterate that this is necessarily an ethical dilemma. We are, again, considering whether we ought to implement legislation which would control guns.
Well, and also we did a lot of things that weren't ethics. We were basically, taking you down a decision tree, as you did with us, the parallel universes where it goes one way and goes the other. You couldn't go down a way where, things were at least significantly worse, but going down our way, there was at least the possibility of things being actually a great deal better. So, how do you not change your mind based on that possibility?
Wait, it's also still possible things could have been worse. Like, let's take the Vegas shooting, for example. Let's say, hypothetically, there was a mass confusion. Everybody started pulling out their guns. They all thought that the shooter was somebody else. You could have had more than 500 people get shot. If we're going to throw out the possibility
can you show any realistic scenario where that's actually happened?
Any realistic... Well, we just had 2 good guys with guns get shot recently. I think both of them were security guards.
By police, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Not by armed citizens.
Okay, why do you think that an armed citizen would be better qualified to decide who the shooter is than the police?
Because the armed citizen is there at the time. He's not showing up later, not knowing what led up to that.
Yeah, but if you have somebody shooting from a hotel room, and then the first thing the armed citizen sees is somebody pulling out a gun, they're not going to know where the shots are coming from. If they start hearing firing going from everywhere, that's a hugely chaotic situation.
Yeah, but I don't see how you can go from it's a chaotic situation to my nightmare scenario necessarily will happen.
This is really splitting hairs. Anything a cop can fuck up on, an armed citizen could equally fuck up on. Can we agree with that?
Well, no, because like I said, the armed citizen is there and saw what unfolded.
Why couldn't an armed citizen just show up like the same as a cop?
But because the armed citizen has no reason to.
What, somebody hears gunshots and they can't just run up to somebody?
That's being there at the time. That's not showing up later. You're talking about the cops being called, and showing up minutes later with virtually no information as to what's transpired.
Dapperton is proposing that someone joins this ring, but the problem here, and this is why I'm going to ask the question if it's okay for this person to join, is this is going to put one side at a disadvantage in the debate.
May I ask who it is?
Sinatra? I think that's how you say their name.
Oh, Sinatra Says?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm cool with him.
Is everybody in favor?
I'm going to be like the odd man out. Like, I love Sinatra, and Sinatra knows I love him. I want that Sinatra dick. But like at this point, like what more ground is there to cover? Like, we're not getting anywhere.
Well, maybe that's the idea. The 4 of us have been going back and forth. Maybe he can inject something new.
Yes, maybe perhaps Sinatra could inject some new discussion that can get everybody talking about something.
Sinatra, you get that Italian mofo in this room.
We're over time anyway. We probably need to be winding down. But yeah, we can hear what Sinatra says and then wind down after that.
I'm unfamiliar with this position, but I'm more than willing to step down.
He's a crazy Trump supporter. Let's bring him in. Sinatra, my nigga.
Hey, Sinatra, love the channel.
Thank you. What's going on, guys? So I guess my question is, why are you arguing hypotheticals this whole time? There's real stuff to argue about here. And
I tried bringing up the real stuff.
The Vegas shooting over and over and over again really looks like you're being put at a disadvantage that you have to name the one like super anomalous mass shooting, because it was the only one ever like that was the one in Texas. You can name just about any other mass shooting that's happened in this country, and it could have easily been stopped with a guy right there with a gun. Someone said it earlier, I don't remember who, but when seconds count, cops are minutes away. Why are you going to rely on someone who isn't going to make it in time?
Well, this is why I argued for security guards, because they'd be there at the event.
There are security guards there, but they're not always armed. You have to have a special license to be an armed security guard, and a lot of these places don't pay for that.
I wouldn't have any problem making it easier for security guards to be armed.
Why would you trust a security guard over any other citizen?
Training. That's why. If you guys are in favor of like a solution that gives businesses tax exemptions or gives them grants to hire armed security, I'm totally in favor of that. When Wayne LaPierre said the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, he wasn't exactly wrong. We're all fine with the idea of armed security guards.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. We are all okay with armed security guards. But if we just move past the fact that unless you put an armed guard in every gun-free zone, this is going to happen all the time in gun-free zones.
So this gets
Red Bat, whatever your name is. I don't know why earlier you completely lied about those rape statistics, but France alone has a higher per capita rate than the U.S.
Sure, we can find individual anomalies, but the U.S., I think we're like 14th in rapes per capita.
Yeah, but you said all of Europe, and I just wanted to put it out there that France alone is higher than us.
Okay, if I said that, I meant most of Europe.
Okay, you're still wrong on that, though. The fact is, you guys said it earlier. It's the part that really got my almonds going, is that if a man came to kill a woman with a gun, do you think that he should, whatever that argument was, the fact is that if the woman has a gun, then she still has a chance, and if she doesn't,
yeah, we're not against the idea of the woman having the gun.
I don't know what the fuck you were talking about earlier, but it was like this huge thing where you said that the woman shouldn't buy a gun.
No,
I don't think anybody said that.
Well, let's take for example if
the scenario was that she wasn't able to get a gun because of a waiting period or whatever.
Yeah, hence the hypothetical.
Would she be on the same waiting period?
Well,
so the argument, Sinatra, was that waiting periods save lives by stopping impulsive acts of violence. Shane's response was that waiting periods actually cost lives because it prevents people who could defend themselves from purchasing guns. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And you weren't able to supply anything that says that one happens more than the other. So.
Well, I did. It was just we agreed that it was contentious and we shouldn't talk about it. Although I can provide data that suggests that waiting periods save lives if you'd like that.
I would like to see this because I want to know what waiting period saves a life. Because I don't know anyone who gets mad and then goes, I'm going to buy a gun right now.
I can provide data that, cell phones cause brain cancer. They still don't.
PNAS?
Well, I mean, you're talking about someone who's like just really mad, just totally gone crazy. Well, I mean, if he has a gun with him there at the time, then yeah, because they call that a crime of passion. I don't think it happens all that often, but I mean, okay, it happens. But what you're talking about is a waiting period to prevent someone, because without it, he would get in his car, go to the gun store, go through, select a gun, trying to get it and everything, maybe even, squeeze off a few rounds at their firing range, because that's what you do when you buy a gun. You don't just walk in and walk out like, Michael Moore did when he completely lied in that movie about how he got that gun, because he had it pre-ordered and he just picked it up and he made it look like he went in and out. But anyway, the point of that was impulsive. You're doing all that, and then you're coming back home, and you're still, after that time, in this, agitated state or whatever. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, so it operates on a cooldown period. Basically, people who are impulsive and have acts of violence and want to commit acts of violence, be it homicides against other persons or suicides against themselves, sometimes have their issues resolved on their own within the waiting period, and that's why they can't carry out that act of violence.
But I mean, the cooldown happens, and it happens faster because you get your mind on something else, and now your mind is on buying a gun. So, I mean, at this point, it really stops being a crime of passion and becomes first-degree premeditated murder. You are buying the gun with the intent of killing someone.
Yeah, hence the impulsive part. It prevents impulsive acts of violence.
But
obviously, it can't do anything if you're planning a violence.
First-degree murder
I know
is
that,
not
Shane.
impulsive.
Not everybody who is rejected from buying a gun is going to go out and get one anyway to commit a crime.
if you want to go commit a crime with a gun, and if any one of you have ever lived in a shitty area, a ghetto black area, you know that you can get a gun like that for free. So this waiting period is bullshit.
Yep, and that's illegal too.
But guess what? If you're going to commit a crime, you're not worried about the legality of obtaining the weapon. There are more instances of terroristic type murder where there are guns virtually banned.
So I have to stress the word impulsive again. This isn't you planning on it, right? This isn't like premeditated. This means you're simply out to cause damage immediately. You're acting on an impulse.
But that can only happen when the gun is there at the time.
What makes you think that if you are this damn motivated to do something, taking away a gun is going to stop that motivation?
The data.
Additionally, Sanity Project might I add that buying a gun in and of itself is an act of premeditation, because you plan to go out and then do it. It's not impulsive at that point.
Okay, again, this feels like pedantry of the highest degree. Can we not agree that there are some? Can we not agree
you know
that
what pedantry means either?
You don't know anything. Can we not agree that if somebody wants to purchase a gun and they can't, and they want to do something on the spot and they can't, they can be dissuaded from doing it?
No, because they can strangle them, they can hit them, they can grab a knife from the kitchen and stab them. They have all sorts of things.
Explain why states that have waiting periods have significantly fewer homicides.
I'm looking at this and I see that it's saying the same thing, but what I don't understand is how they came to this conclusion. The waiting periods.
You can click the PDF and read the methodology, but the methodology is irrelevant. The point is, when you look at states with waiting periods, they have lower gun homicide rates than states that don't by 17%.
I do believe the methodology is relevant.
Yeah, well, how come there was this? Even if this one study says this, another study that you all posted, not ours, but your study, says that the effect wasn't there with waiting periods. How do you explain the discrepancy between those two studies?
What study was that?
The one you guys published earlier when it talked about,
was a study on suicides, dude. It's a different study. They're looking at something entirely different.
But it's still impulsive action. You're talking about impulsive action here. It's the same thing.
Okay.
So I'm looking at this right now, and it says waiting period on all homicide is a negative 0.073. So gun homicide is 0.103, 0.093. Then the rest of it is non-gun homicide, suicide, non-gun suicide, and gun suicide.
Right. So the one you want to look at is the one where it says
stopping gun suicides. That's what it's doing.
It breaks it all down. So look at gun homicide specifically. It says waiting period. You read it out. 0.071. Right. That's 71. Represents 17% reduction.
That's what it says. 39 homicides.
I'm looking at table S5 here, and the numbers do not look all that impressive. Even then they say P is less than 0.01, and all their less than 0.10, and all their figures are less than 0.10. So how is it significant?
It also it's not 17%. And this is per 100,000 adult residents.
So
are you guys reading this?
It says 39 gun homicides per year out of the 33,000 gun deaths per year. That's 0.012%,
which represents 17% by state. Right? That's a big number.
If something goes from 0.01 to 0.005, oh, that was cut by 50%. Wow, isn't that it's still this tiny 0.005% reduction.
Okay, so this is again the Nirvana fallacy, right? It doesn't do it enough for you.
It's not a Nirvana fallacy. You're misusing the statistics.
I'm stating what it says. 17% reduction in gun homicides.
I just explained why that's misleading.
Wrong numbers to be.
I just explained why that's misleading.
Okay.
Hold on, Shane. If you're arguing that the data set was too small. Or is that what you're arguing? So that
no, I'm saying the effect size is too small. Look at table S5 at the bottom. It says that it's less than 0.1. All of those figures are less than 0.1, so they're not big enough to be statistically significant according to their own p-values.
Okay, so the results. We began blah 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 from the simple period blah 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 blah. The results of the table 1 show the waiting periods are associated with a 17% reduction in gun homicides. This is equivalent to less than 36 fewer gun homicides per year. 36 fewer per year, and it doesn't say by state with this. It just says for a state.
Sinatra, you got me. I guess we shouldn't have waiting periods because 36 people is just too few lives.
I don't know why you're going to change complete and total laws based on 36 people per year.
And now you're doing
things that kill hundreds of thousands of people per year. There are things that kill.
I'm not the one nitpicking at this. I'm the opposite.
You put this out, and it got picked.
Yeah, you're nitpicking at it. The
yes,
point
I am
is
going to nitpick the dumb shit you put out there.
Well, that's because you're dumb. The point is that the gun waiting periods reduce firearm homicides. If it doesn't do it enough for you, well, I'm sorry, but that's the Nirvana fallacy.
You know what else would reduce? I could name 100 things right now that would reduce gun homicides fewer than 36.
Solutions. Yes, please. Instead of nitpicking at my solutions, let's hear your solution.
You could ban the sale of guns in certain neighborhoods. You could stop selling guns in certain neighborhoods. You could go door to door and take away guns in ghetto neighborhoods, and it would result in tens of thousands.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But we're not going to do that. No, we're not. We're going to put a waiting period on law-abiding citizens.
Okay, Sinatra, are you in favor of taking away people's guns?
No. But I'm saying, why would you start with this as opposed to something else?
Because it's tangible, real, and observable. It's something that's been studied.
It's tangible and real. What's more tangible about this than going door to door and taking guns away from ghetto people?
Okay, by tangible, I mean it's already implemented in the real world. We haven't gone and taken guns door to door from people.
Okay, these 36 people, that's just an observation. How do you know that the statistical noise in this doesn't outweigh the 36%? Because according to what I'm looking here, the p-values, it looks like it does.
Okay, so are you guys do you just disagree with the methodology, or do you disagree with the...
No, we're asking you, how do we not know that?
No, I am assuming that the results are correct and basing my decision based on the results. And from what I am seeing, these results do not go outside of their stated uncertainty.
So you disagree with the methodology?
No,
I don't disagree with the methodology. I disagree that the results rise to the level of statistical significance.
Okay, so those 36 per state, by the way, you guys keep leaving that part out, equates to roughly 750 gun homicides per year.
They've included the District of Columbia. Let me find the list.
So just to be clear, we're stuck in this quagmire again where we can't agree that gun waiting periods save.
Because DC is a really high crime area, and if they're picking ones like that, that might skew it too. And every time you do say that, you say it's pedantry and a Nirvana fallacy, and you've repeated that all night
because you guys were focusing on the 36 number, like that represented a small number of deaths, so we shouldn't really have gun waiting periods.
Okay, well now we're asking you to defend the conclusion that's drawn by this by proving that it's not due to variance.
I don't have the qualifications to pick apart this data. If you want to,
well then how do you support the conclusion?
I simply repeat what smarter men than me say.
They claim to control for alcohol consumption.
You don't understand it because you're not an expert.
Poverty, income, urbanization, black population, and 7 different age groups. How can you control for that in a 17 statewide study?
And more to the point, how do you know that, a couple of those states aren't outliers that are skewing the statistics? And since you're not looking at all of the states, the way this works is the more categories you break it down into, the greater and greater your uncertainties get.
I'm sorry, Shane. Wasn't your argument earlier that we should include the entire world's murder rate to judge gun homicide?
I believe we should reject.
Yes, and now I'm saying if you're looking at homicides rate in America, you should include all of America, and not just 17 states.
No, you want to include controls. You look at the states,
and they're not saying what states are done. By the way.
So
this seems like a flawed study in and of itself. They don't say
cool. Write your own. Then
they claim to control for poverty, alcohol consumption of individuals buying a gun, income, urbanization, and black population. What the fuck is this?
Are we going to gloss over the appeal to authority that was made?
Yes, I'm appealing to authority. I'm appealing to authority right here now, purposefully, because I don't have the credentials to secondhand guess this. If you do, please write your own study and provide it to me.
Well, I don't have to write a study to tell you it's wrong.
You've been secondhand guessing every single study we've put forward.
No, I haven't. I haven't secondhand guessed anything. I said I hadn't read them. That's what I said.
Well, what about this? What if I put this article from PolitiFact forward that says there's no statistical evidence that a waiting period for a gun purchase reduces violence? They rated that as mostly true. And PolitiFact rated it as that.
Can you argue that? Do you have the qualifications for that?
Nope, why not really. Rate it as mostly.
How is your position not a form of relativism?
They only rate it as a reduction in suicide.
Seems like we have both sides talking about statistics, but we can't seem to agree that the statistics are viable and can be used as part of your argument.
Well, no, the issue is he's refusing to defend any form of statistics because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've essentially resorted to a form of relativism. Right? Whatever the experts say becomes true.
Yes.
So why is relativism something we should consider as a valid argument?
Because you're too stupid to understand it on your own.
So you're too stupid
I know what
to
relativism
understand.
That applies to me too. Yes, we all are. We are all arguing as laymen. We should understand that.
So basically, you're saying that your expert has a bigger dick than our expert. That's your argument.
Sanity
Use whatever experts you want.
Do you know the extent of my knowledge?
You seem brilliant, dude.
Do you know the extent of Shane DK's knowledge?
He seems brilliant as well.
Do you know well, you're not answering the question. Do you know the extent of our knowledge?
No, I don't know the extent.
Why would you make a claim that we can't understand these?
Good point. Do you guys have the technical background to counter that? Okay, solve that problem then. Thank you.
You sourced one thing. I'll tell you what PolitiFact sourced, all right? The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, Journalist Resources, Journalists of American Medical Association, I believe that's the one you gave us, the University of Chicago, the University of Alabama, Injury Prevention to Suicide, email exchanges between gun safety mayors and against illegal gun communications, the U.S. Court of Appeals, a few different email exchanges, the interview with a Wisconsin Carry Inc. chairman, Nick Clark, crime and delinquency, a study done in meta-analysis, sent the CDC and prevention, journalist of criminal and law criminology, and Harvard University professor David Hymanway. So that's who's cited in this that says it's true that there's no statistical evidence. The only reason it's rated as mostly true is because it does not have a full effect on suicides.
To kind of like try to wrap this up, because obviously we've been going on for a while. I mean, we've gone back and forth on so many tangents. How about we try to maybe, I guess, I don't know, agree to disagree on certain things, and maybe even talk about, you know, if you maybe have changed your opinions from this debate on anything.
I'll tell you what, LSP was the one who got me to become a repeal the NFA person. It was a conversation with him that I had that.
Now, what's the NFA? What's the NFA?
The National Firearms Act, the suppressors.
Is that the 86 one? The 1986 one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
No suppressors, no machine guns. I was in favor of that, and it was
how did I change
with LSP that turned my mind on that.
Wait, what did I say that changed your mind?
I just the research I did afterwards into it, and I thought it okay.
Oh, okay.
Even before that happened, suppressors and fucking.
I'm glad I could change your mind, sir. You know I love you, Sinatra, right?
You should love me.
You're my homie.
Everybody loves Sinatra.
Let me ask Shane, throughout this debate, have you had your mind changed on any particular topic throughout this debate?
Well, I think I've got a little more insight. There have at least been some arguments here that aren't just the stock arguments that come up every single time we debate this. So I'm getting a better idea of kind of the range of opinions on the other side, and that's always a good thing.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Red Bat? Have you had your mind changed on anything today?
I need to think about my ethical system a little bit more, figure out where that balance is.
All right, and I guess I'll ask Liberal, have you had anything on your mind changed?
No, like on issues, no, but Shane and Toast, you know, guys, I love you guys.
I'm enjoying this, even if I do get triggered and yell at you occasionally.
Love you too, buddy.
So I would say we had a pretty heated debate on both sides of the fence here. We had Shane lost his temper a couple times, but that's okay. You know, very passionate fellow. I actually didn't know any of y'all before today, but I can definitely tell y'all all know y'all's stuff. I actually learned a lot as just sitting here being the moderator, and I actually had my mind changed on a couple of things. So I think everybody came out kind of learning a little bit, maybe changing their minds on things they weren't, you know, maybe on the fence about, or maybe they got educated about, you know. So I think overall it was a pretty good debate, I would say. Any like closing statements from anybody?
So we came at this with a structural disadvantage. We have all the stats to support our claims that gun violence is real, it's problematic, and we have data-driven solutions such as background checks and waiting periods. However, none of this matters for the simple reason that we are arguing against ANCAPs. And so any solution that involves a government is untenable or unethical. And instead of justifying gun control, we have to justify the very existence of a state. We have a gun culture, and it costs us. Every year, 35,000 people die due to gun violence in the United States. 10,000 of those are homicides. Want to know how that fares against comparable nations? Australia had 42. The United Kingdom had 23. Switzerland had 18. Japan had 4. No country has a higher rate of firearm ownership than the United States, where more guns are in circulation than private citizens. If guns made us safer, ask yourself why we're not the safest country in the world. The obvious answer should be they don't. They are weapons designed with the purpose of killing human beings, and to that end, they have been successful. This debate is all problem, no solution, and that is for no reason but your own intransigence. But I love you guys. Don't forget that.
See, if you would have came out with that, and that would have been a good place to start with.
I basically did come out with that. I said, like, from the beginning, the whole problem is that...
If I would have heard that from the beginning, I guess.
Well, I said that
I guess my problem is your figures aren't adjusted for population. We have 330 million people in this country, remember? So, yeah, just to everyone out there, I think the ultimate question about this is, do you think you could get rid...
Sorry.
Okay. Do you think you could get rid of all the guns in the world just by wishing? I'm guessing you don't. Do you think we could get it by wishing by all holding hands in a drum circle? I'm guessing you don't. So why do you think it'll be effective if we write that wish down on paper and call it the law? In 1919, people wished that alcohol would go away. They wrote it down on paper and called it the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It didn't work. It hasn't worked with drugs. It hasn't worked with immigrants. It hasn't worked with anything they've tried to prohibit. Why should it work any better with guns?
First, I'd like to reiterate that we should generally in academia reject relativist positions. I don't believe that they're consistent intellectually or otherwise. Additionally, I'd like to question why the opponent to your arguments, who that is relevant to whether or not it's a fair argument or not. Right? Because you should be able to defend your position no matter who attacks it.
I've looked far and wide for an answer to this question. And this is off the cuff, right? I didn't write this shit. I've looked far and wide. I've Google searched. I've looked everywhere I can, and I still can't find an answer as to why LSP is so gay.
Yo, mama.
I agree with Sinatra on that one point.
Can I get a new debating partner?
I'll join your side next time.
Come on over to the ANCAP side. There's cake.
I don't want your fucking cake.
Yeah, you'll have all the debate partners, right? Yep.
I have a closing statement, but it's kind of similar to LSP, so I had to change a few things. Okay. America quite clearly has a problem with shootings. Looking at international data between countries that are actually comparable to the United States makes it fairly clear that the variable we can attribute to gun violence is the availability of firearms. This renders public settings relatively unsafe compared to most of Europe. After isolating the variable of the availability of guns, which is the only variable unique to us and rare in Europe, it should hopefully become clear that suggesting more guns to solve the problem seems a bit iffy. It might work, it might not work, who knows. I'm not particularly attached to any one solution to this problem, but until we have an honest realization that this is a problem, I think we can expect it to get worse.
Are we done? Are we off?